Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
And Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom survived the trials of Mephisto? We're going to be discovering that question and many more in tonight's episode of Systematic Geekology. We are the Priest of the Geeks. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, joined by the wonderful Dr. Andy Walsh. How's it going, Andy?
Doing fine, thanks. How are you, Christian?
I'm all right, man. Had another recording earlier today. I'm about to hit the weekend and go on vacation, so I am going to have some fun.
Excellent.
Now, yeah. So, Andy, we are doing an All Reading Counts episode. And in honor of that, since we're doing graphic novels, what was the last graphic novel you read besides this one?
Yeah, so if I have to go back to like an actual thing that was published as a graphic novel, I think it was The Five Fists of Science by Matt Fraction and Steve Sanders, which is sort of a historical fiction about Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison and their rivalry, and Mark Twain is involved and a couple other folks. It's kind of a wild, like I said, historical fiction, alternate take on what those folks might have been up to in that era.
It's hard to miss with Fraction.
Yeah. But the thing that I most recently read is just like a big chunk of comics all in one volume. Kevin has been raving about the Nice House on the Lake. And so I checked that out. So I wanted to shout that out since he's been recommending it several times now to me.
Okay. Yeah, I had a hard time remembering this, but I'm fairly certain the last thing I read would have been The Death of Captain Marvel. I just kind of got in the mood to reread it again because honestly, I really missed the character. I loved reading those comics as a kid. My dad had them pretty much all of them. But also, I did reread not too long ago Watchmen again. Just one of those things like, I got nothing better to do. Let's reread some Watchmen.
Fair enough.
Oh, I should have added that to the list before hold on. Oh well, hindsight being 2020, and like we said earlier, this is part of our All Reading Count series. If you are interested to see the past episodes, please check out the links in the description down below. And as well, if you want to donate, especially to this program, what we do is if you buy any of the merch that we have up there, you can make a one-time donation or go to Patreon, do the same thing, and get the bonus episode, the bonus question for this episode. And the proceeds will all be donated to local libraries. None of it comes back to us. So that's it. Andy, you ready to get into this bad boy?
Absolutely.
All right. Today, you patrons voted on this out of a list of, I think we had 8 selections, 4 apiece. You chose Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom, Triumph and Torment. Now, before we actually get into this proper, Andy, what does it mean for you when you hear the term all reading counts?
Well, I think of campaigns to encourage folks to consider any kind of reading to be beneficial to developing reading skills, to developing wider exposure to ideas and the world and vocabulary and all these kinds of things, right? So some folks kind of narrow the range to just, printed books, printed novels, printed nonfiction, something like that. But, I think it's an effort to encourage people that reading comics is still very much reading. It still develops reading skills. I remember learning vocabulary words reading superhero comics in junior high.
Oh yeah.
So I was definitely on board with that notion. But yeah, anything. Also, audiobooks. Any way in which you are engaging with something that somebody wrote text for, then it counts as reading.
Now, I'll never forget, like, I learned what the word apropos meant when I was reading, I think it was a Union Jack miniseries that I think released in the 90s. It's like, oh, man, I actually had to look what a word means, and that's very rare, and it's nice to have that in your comics. I remember actually Peter David told a story one time where his daughter had brought some comics into school, and her teacher was very upset and said that they were very lowbrow, and he had some of them on hand for I think it was during his Hulk run. He said, all right, when's the last time someone used the word sepulcher at the second grade reading level?
Yeah, Peter David's a good one for broadening one's both cultural references and vocabulary.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I've answered it before, but it just stayed consistent. It's like, all reading counts because what you're doing, just exploring whatever an author is writing, whether that be, a biography, nonfiction, or you get into a comic realm or some great fantasy literature. It's like, just enjoy, get away from the world a little bit, but also learn while you're doing it. It's a ton of fun. That's why we keep coming back to stuff like this, because we are engaging not only what the author is intending, but also exploring, what will we do in that scenario and all this mess that it can't be done in the same way without actually getting into the texts that have all these wonderful things in them. That's why I love we do the series.
Yeah, great. I'm sold.
All right. So why did I choose this one? I'm trying to remember my list. I definitely had the Death of Captain Marvel on there. I think I had the Dark Knight Returns. And maybe, did I have Kingdom? I think I have Kingdom Come as well.
That sounds right.
Andy, what was your list so people knew?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see if I can, just a moment.
Okay. So while you're doing that, this one specifically, I had... this was one of those stories you'd always heard in the back of your head. And, at one point, Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom fought for the soul of Doctor Doom's mother against Mephisto. And as someone who has a lot of grievances against the character of Mephisto because of Marvel editorial, that sounded like a fun story. And decided to put it on there because I know, Joshua really loves Doctor Strange and Doom. I thought he'd be interested in, having this be on there too. So I put that as an option. Did you find them?
Yeah, or at least some of them. I definitely had Number Cruncher by Cy Spurrier. Had some, I forget exactly which, Raina Tegmeyer, but I had one of them that my daughter suggested. And then I think I had the Slaughterhouse-5 adaptation by Ryan North.
Okay. Yeah, I brought up, those were the options that the patrons had to select from. And I have not read most of what Andy had to put out there, but I did want you guys to have a chance to check them out. Just because we're covering one doesn't mean we don't want you to check out the other ones.
Yep.
So, Andy, what was your introduction to this graphic novel proper?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think I had heard of it until I saw it on the list. And I went and checked it out. I don't know quite how it passed me by. I guess I just wasn't reading Marvel comics as they were coming out in the 80s very much. And my dives into history since then have been more on the X-Men side of things. So this somehow was not on my radar. Although reading it, I kind of felt like I must have read it because so much of it was very familiar backstory. I just didn't know that this was the comic in which all of those things either were written for the first time or sort of collected and presented in a singular sort of vision in this way. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that this was my introduction to it.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely one of those that other comics have built off of. So definitely been flashbacks to stuff like this in the past. So I can definitely feel like I understand why, I know the story because it's probably been told again elsewhere. Where exactly I can't figure out on the top of my head. But for me, this was a couple of years ago. It's one of those exploring the different things I hadn't gotten to yet. I'm pretty sure my dad doesn't own this one. So that would be another reason why I hadn't checked it out. And it's like, hey, there's some gaps in my Marvel knowledge. Let's check it out. And I had a good old time. So when we were figuring out what to do with this, I added it to the list just to see what people got. And this was overwhelmingly what they picked.
Cool.
All right. So our titular characters, Doctor Strange, Doctor Doom, what's your history with them?
Yeah, so my first memory of Doctor Doom was my grandparents had this collected volume of origin stories or notable stories of Marvel villains. I don't remember exactly what it was called. I don't know why they had it. They didn't have a lot of other comic books in their house, but somehow they had this collection. So it had like the origin of Loki and the first appearance of the Absorbing Man and a Red Skull story where he brainwashes Captain America and some things like that. And there was an early issue of the Fantastic Four, or maybe multiple stories. There was definitely the story where Doctor Doom, they use Doctor Doom's time platform and wind up back in time, and the Thing winds up as Blackbeard the pirate. That's like,
oh yes,
it's probably in the single digits in the Fantastic Four run, but there was also just some backstory to Doctor Doom. I don't remember if that was all in the same issue or if there were multiple Doom stories in that collection. But anyway, I must have read that book, half a dozen times at least, because we'd go over there and I wanted something to read, and that was appealing. So I remember paging through that one a bunch of times. And then like I said, I wasn't reading Marvel comics regularly at the time, and when I did get into them, I was more reading the X-Men. But since Marvel Unlimited, I've been keeping up more with the wide range of things, and so I've read most of the modern Fantastic Four from like Fraction and Hickman and things forward. So, and I've gone back and read some other things. So like the original Secret Wars I've read, that's a classic Doom story.
Oh yes.
And then obviously the contemporary Hickman Secret Wars and all that built up to that. That was all pretty solid Doctor Doom stuff. But yeah, that's most of I think that's most of my experience with him. Oh, and of course, who can forget his confrontation with Squirrel Girl in Ryan North and Erica Henderson's Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. Another classic tale. Pun absolutely intended.
Oh yes.
And in terms of Doctor Strange, I think it was really the movie that kind of got me into Doctor Strange. I obviously encountered him and read a few stories with him, but it was definitely the movie with Benedict Cumberbatch that got me a little bit more excited for reading more comics that with him as the main character. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the nutshell. How about you?
Yeah. Me, both of them would be cartoons. Being a 90s kid and being the son of my father, watched the Fantastic Four cartoon that came out like in 94-ish. And that was my introduction to Doctor Doom. It's this scary, menacing guy in this metal armor. It's like, oh, it's Darth Vader, being created obviously years before Vader. But kids don't know the difference between that. So it's this, oh my gosh, he's so intimidating, and he's got that deep voice, and he menaces my Fantastic Four characters. I don't like that. And there was also a couple episodes of the last couple episodes of the Spider-Man show in the 90s where they adapted Secret Wars, and he, of course, had a huge role in that one. So I got to see him there. Now, Doctor Strange also would have been Spider-Man as well, because I think the appearance he had in the Incredible Hulk show was a year after this. So showing him and Baron Mordo and the whole thing with Dormammu and the symbiotes in that show, I mean, it got wild and wacky at times. So that was my introduction to the both of them. Comics-wise, it probably would have been, I was around 10 or 11, and I started reading my dad's comics more and reading some old Fantastic Four and reading a couple of the Doctor Strange issues he had. I can't remember exactly what off the top of my head, but definitely it would have been around the hundreds in the Fantastic Four for Doctor Doom. Don't remember for Strange. Now, Andy, do you want to go out with me and, summarize the plot of this story?
Sure. So we open with a set of characters that I had certainly never heard of before. I don't know if we're meant to know them.
Age Genghis is from Strange Tales. Other than that, most of the characters we see here are new. Okay.
Yeah. So, he and one of his acolytes or servants are having a conversation. The aged Genghis is apparently not always the most lucid, but he's experiencing a rare moment of lucidity, which causes him to recount his first encounter with Doctor Doom. And so we get the first chunk of Doctor Doom's origin story, which several other chunks will come up later in the book. And so Doctor Doom encountered the aged Genghis in his quest to develop his mystical powers. Not unlike Doctor Strange's quest to meet the Ancient One and study under him. Although Doctor Doom gets turned away and sent to another group, and they're the folks who forge his armor for him and send him back to Latveria as Doctor Doom, and not just Victor Von Doom. Mm-hmm. So we get all that rehash of that history, and that leads to, it turns out that he's experiencing this moment of lucidity because it's time for every 100 years there's a tournament to decide who's the Sorcerer Supreme, and his job is to summon everyone to this tournament and kind of set the parameters for it. And so everybody who around the world who is mystical enough to, or attuned to the higher planes or whatever, enough to hear this whispered call is summoned to a location, and of course that includes Stephen Strange, who evidently is the kind of like in the film is going as the master of mystic arts, but not the Sorcerer Supreme yet. And he undertakes a fairly arduous journey. He's like, I could just snap my fingers and teleport exactly where I need to be, but for some reason I feel the need to spend several pages trekking through the jungle and all of that.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly. The artist wants to draw some different scenery. So so they wind up at this tournament. Doctor Doom also shows up, as well as a bunch of other magical characters from around the Marvel Universe who I did not recognize, and it sounds like maybe were fairly mostly new characters,
as I understand it.
Yeah, and so they're given a task that involves freeing someone from a sort of crystalline prison, and their first attempts are unsuccessful because it's magic and it's tricky and so forth. And so there's this elaborate magical battle contest going on, lots of multicolored bursts of energy, and Doctor Doom is using it as an opportunity to study and learn more about everybody else's magic, and it comes down to Strange and Doom, unsurprisingly, are the only ones left, and Strange figures out the solution to the challenge, and he is granted the title of Sorcerer Supreme, and he, as it was sort of explained before the contest began, a boon will be granted, but it turns out that Stephen Strange doesn't get to ask the boon; he has to grant the boon.
Yes,
and so
great twist.
Yes. And so Doctor Doom, it's a little unclear why Doctor Doom gets to ask it of him. I guess maybe because he was the second place finisher. Or
he was the only one left besides him.
Yeah. So he asks for Doctor Strange's help in freeing the soul of his mother from Mephisto. And so Stephen Strange says, well, I got to go along with this. So they take a trip back to Latveria. Strange gets to see Latveria and what it's like, for the people of Latveria and how much they love Doom and all that kind of all the trappings that come with that of, do these people really love him? Is it all staged? Is it all, are they obligated to? Those questions are raised. They're not really answered in this story. But we get to see a little bit of that context. And then we get another flashback. Strange runs into one of Doctor Doom, gives him somebody to assist him, and that person helpfully fills in more of the backstory of the story of Doom and his parents and Doom's childhood and how his mother was this healer and mystic with her people, and they were what I now think we would call Romani. Other terms are used in the story. And so it's
of the times.
Yes, right. So they're a minority in Latveria at the time, and mistreated, and she's trying to protect her people, and she ultimately finds a way to do so, but she makes a bargain with Mephisto, and it damns her soul, but puts the Romani folk in a better position in Latveria, such that ultimately, Doom winds up as the ruler of Latveria. He finds out about his mom's mystical past and decides to study both the mystical arts and the sciences to figure out how to contact her and how to free her from Mephisto's clutches. And that builds up to the accident which scars him. That Reed Richards tried to spare him from. He was trying to contact his mother, and he made a miscalculation. But he wouldn't listen to the advice of that fool Richards, and got blown up. Strange learns that kind of backstory, and then they prepare. They do go through kind of a training montage to get ready for facing Mephisto, and then they're off to hell to confront Mephisto. I don't know how much we want to get. So that's about 2/3 in the story. I don't know how much we want to get into kind of spoiling the ending of how that confrontation goes.
Do you love systematic geekology as much as I do? Of course you do. So why don't you hop on over to the Systematic Geekology shop and get yourself some merch. We have clothing like hats, extra soft t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies. We even have glassware and mugs. One of my favorite coffee mugs that I use every morning is a coffee mug that has on it, share the faith, share the geek. Yeah, I get my geek on first thing every morning, thinking of Systematic Geekology. And I know you need to hop over there and get you some merch, represent us out in the wild, out in the public, and let people know that you too like to share the faith and share the geek.
Yeah.
You can probably
we
guess
can go
that
broad strokes.
Yeah, I mean, as any good story involving a confrontation with the devil does, there are deals made, there are loopholes in the terms, and Doom kind of finds a way to hoist Mephisto by his own petard in a way that usually goes the other way around, and in very classic Doom fashion of I was more honorable than you thought. It kind of depends on people assuming that he will be more villainous than he actually is. He has his own code. He's more honorable than you might expect from somebody who is often portrayed as a villain and a dictator and so forth. But he's also, he has his own ends, and he keeps his plan close to himself.
Yes.
And,
so Strange never really knows, is this actually his plan, or was he making it up on the fly?
Right. Yeah. In fact, there's a caption or a dialogue balloon that's essentially exactly that. Like, what just happened? Was he making it up as we went, or is it possible that he'd anticipated all of these different angles? While they're in hell, we also get a recap of Strange's origin. He has to confront his past, and he gets kind of a nightmare version of his origin story in which the Ancient One rejects him, and he doesn't get to learn the mystic arts and so forth. And that's when he realizes, wait a minute, no, I'm a good person. He wouldn't have turned me away, and that's how he sees through the illusion.
Oh yes.
But yeah, I think that's probably enough of a recap.
Yeah, well done. All right. Yeah, the story essentially kind of giving, because Doom had used sorcery in the past, but this gives him more of a motivation of why he would want to do that. And a couple of years before this, we had I think it's Astonishing Tales 8, where it's established, why Doom was doing the experiment he was to save his mother from hell and being tormented by all this. And this is actually the story that's built off of that, almost a decade later is when it's written, even more than that maybe, where he connives a way to utilize someone else to get what he wants. So in context of all that, Andy, who do we have as our favorite character out of this graphic novel?
As weird as it might be, I think it has to be Doom.
Of course.
Strange is here and gets, co-billing, but he's very, very passive and reactive in the whole thing. and he doesn't really have much of a story arc other than, kind of learning a begrudging respect for Doctor Doom. But which is bizarre if for a story which establishes him as the Sorcerer Supreme, which seems like it should be a pretty big milestone, a pretty big moment for him. It just kind of happens like a third of the way through the book without a whole lot of fanfare. And yeah, it's really Doom who drives the story and who gets the deeper character development.
Yeah, I most definitely agree with you. I mean, Doom is pretty much our protag for this, and he does a magnificent job of being himself, and that is manipulating people to get what he wants. And it's kind of implied maybe he took a dive at the trial for the Sorcerer Supreme so that he would be the one who was granted this favor. Maybe he never wanted to become Sorcerer Supreme because that would hold him back, which is real funny in light of recent events, shall we say,
Yes.
in Marvel, where he has attained that. But it's that whole thing of he can't beg someone to do this for him. Like, there's a great scene in Latveria where he's just like, yeah, I wouldn't have asked you to do this. Doom doesn't beg. So he has to connive his way because that's Doom. He's not going to get on his knees and ask you for help. It is, I will machinate things to where I force you to give me what I want. And it does it masterfully in this. Stern does a great job with this story.
Yeah, the plotting is excellent in terms of setting things up and having it all come together in a way that feels like you could absolutely believe that Doctor Doom saw it all coming and put it all together. But also, you as the reader don't. At least I was surprised by some of the twists and the developments. So
yeah, and it also leaves just enough to be like, well, maybe he didn't.
Right.
And
yeah.
Now he's claiming he did.
Right. Yeah. It's not unambiguous, but it's plausible either way.
Yes, and that's a fun ambiguity versus other types of ambiguity was like, well, you didn't really earn any of that.
Right.
Doom being Doom, I think the story earns that.
Absolutely.
So, do you have a favorite scene or moment from this comic?
I mean, there are some climactic moments at the end that are obviously pretty impressive, but without spoiling too much of the details, I did also really enjoy the moment during that initial battle for who's going to be Sorcerer Supreme, where all these other magicians are kind of doing their thing, and Doom is kind of hanging out a little bit, and he's watching what everybody's doing. He's like, oh, look. The way that their energies work, there's a little bit of infrared just before you can see their visible spells. Just such a, like, on the one hand, it is getting pretty granular about the science of it all, but also just like completely nonsense goofiness. Like, why does he need that tip off an instant before? Why can't he just record the actual visual energies and go by that? Who knows? But yeah, so he's analyzing everybody's styles, everybody's magic, kind of a Taskmaster kind of vibe, but obviously using his microcomputers instead of some innate talent that he has to learn and mimic everybody else's spells. And I think Strange comments on that later on, that like, oh, he seems to have attained a level of mastery of some of these things that I would not have expected from him.
Yeah, that's like the great thing about him is that he combines magic and science in a way that Reed never will, because it's not like Reed doesn't believe magic is a thing, but like, he's a science guy. He's got to do his own thing. He's Mr. Fantastic. Doom doesn't care. Whatever gives him the edge, he will put his time and effort into. And like, yeah, that's a great moment there of him analyzing, these people have been at this longer than me. Let me see what they do. But I'm not just going to do this just from the magical side of things. I'm going to use my science. And you see the goofiness of the infrared, like right before something happens, like you pointed out. But it's total Doom to do that. So yeah. I get it. That's a great pick.
Yeah, and it's a nice nuance to Doom that he has a lot of hubris. He has absolute confidence in himself, but he's not so deluded that he can't admit to himself his own areas where he could grow, right? He doesn't just assume that he's the best and most gifted sorcerer in this context. He is willing to acknowledge, at least to himself, that he has things that he could learn from these folks. And and is willing to study and do so. And I think that's always been an interesting aspect of Doom, is that while he might seem, what he's willing to say to other people might suggest that he thinks he's the best at everything all the time, always, but he's not. Yeah, he's willing to be more honest with himself.
Yes,
when he needs to be.
Now, for me, I pick the scene. I think Boris is the name of his manservant, and him explaining why Doom is beloved in Latveria to Strange, who was like, "This is a dictator. Why am I here? I can't be doing anything." And yet, when he gets into the politics of what happened in Latveria back in the day and what Doom has been fighting for this whole time, it lets Strange get to know him more through this person who, yes, obviously is a servant of Doom and has a huge agenda in saying what he's saying, but there's truth in there, which makes Strange kind of realize, okay, so there is a nobility to Doom. He's still a dictator. Don't get anything wrong there, but there's a nobility there that I can appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a nice character moment there that Doom's not giving the monologue. It's someone who serves him.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of that, like, we see Doom here in his role as leader of Latveria. So what points about his rule do you think that this story is trying to make? Because different creators have had different takes on what it means for Doom to be the absolute monarch or dictator of Latveria.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting to try to remember back, like, this would be the very end of the Cold War, right? And so Americans would have certainly had a notion of what, right or wrong, fair or not, it certainly would have had a notion of what Eastern European dictatorships and Eastern European governments would have been like. And yeah, so I think it is. I think this story is trying to paint more of that picture of, yes, he's a dictator, but he is using his absolute power to benefit the people that he considers his people, right? And I don't think we fully, given how his backstory is told, right, and the conflict between the Romani and the other people of Latveria, right? I don't think we have a sense of, well, who are these Latvians now that he's looking out for, right? Is everybody equally taken care of in Latveria or not? Are there people locked away? Are there people who being oppressed in the same way that he and his family were marginalized when he was little? Are they all gone? That's certainly a reading of the backstory, is that there's nobody left and of that kind of ruling class, or that former ruling class. And so, yeah, maybe everybody now is from the group that he would consider his people. But I think we are meant to believe that it's good to be a Latvian, at least if you're among the people that Doom recognizes it as equal Latvians.
Yes,
and that the dangers of Latveria are more for other countries, right? That they will always put Latveria first above everything else. But that doesn't just mean putting Doom first. That does mean putting other Latvians first as well. Is that your read in this particular story, or?
Well, it's such an interesting take on the idea, and I appreciate what's being done here, because you could just say dictator bad. Yeah, sure. For the most part, I'm probably going to agree with you.
Right.
But when you actually explore what Doom has done in the country, who he deposed, and what he's done for his citizens, yes, they can't leave the country unless he pretty much tells them they can do it. Yes, they have a harsher security and everything, but their life is so much more enriched. The country is richer and has freedoms that they didn't have with the previous despot. So there's that nuance there of, he is the absolute ruler who we would never tolerate as Americans. But for the Latvian people who have known nothing except stuff like this, he is the lesser of two evils. So I'm going to follow after him. I'm going to do what he has to say. And yeah, they're still not free, especially by an American standard of that. But there's something to show, like, there's flawed systems everywhere. Here's the flawed system of Latveria, ruled by a flawed man who is still doing good in the midst of his being flawed.
Yeah. Although it's probably also worth noting, right, that, for whatever reason, countries like Latveria and even some actual countries like Germany, right? In the Marvel universe, in comics that were published in like the 70s and the 80s, and sometimes even up through today, right? They're kind of living in like a Grimm's fairy tale version of Europe, or a Disney fairy tale version of Europe, like that kind of mid-Renaissance. Running water is still kind of in the future kind of villagers sort of way. I mean, it's often pointed out, the Nightcrawler's origin story, which is meant to take place in Europe in the second half of the 20th century, and with the sliding timescale now, actually, in the early part of the 21st century, right? But on page, his origin story involves villagers with pitchforks and torches, right? Like something out of almost exactly out of Young Frankenstein. And so how literal, how much are we supposed to take that, and does that factor into this, that is Doom keeping Latveria 300 400 years in the past in terms of technology and so forth, or is that just more just Marvel? Is that Marvel editorial not really understanding what late 20th century Eastern Europe looked like? It's hard to know what to make of that, but it's definitely an aspect. It's definitely right there on the page, right? It's a little bit hard to ignore that this is the conditions that these people are living in, and that might factor into your assessment of whether Doom is a benevolent dictator or not.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things Strange has to confront here, is this image of Doom portrayed by Latverians, but also he's kind of closely related in the story and paralleled with himself in their origin stories just to begin with. Like, how true do you think that this is for both of them to be linked in this manner?
I mean, obviously they are both folks who have pursued, training in magic, and they both have some history with science, right? Dr. Strange, trained as a physician, as a surgeon for years, and worked in that capacity. So they are both men who kind of straddle both of those worlds to different degrees. Doom more so in the sense of trying to always looking to synthesize the two, whereas I think for Strange, it's often more depicted as the two things are in conflict. His duties as the Sorcerer Supreme keep him from the operating room, in a sort of Peter Parker style. My superhero life ruins my civilian life kind of thing, and vice versa sometimes. But I think it's fair to draw parallels. I don't think the story oversells it or overdoes it. It's a little bit complicated by the fact that what we get of Strange's origin story is this hell illusion twisted version of it. Yes. And so it's hard to know. I mean, we know from other stories, which parts correspond and which don't so much to his actual character history, which is such an odd thing to say about these fictional characters, right? Well, his fictional actual fictional story as opposed to the fictional one that's here. But you know what I mean. Yes. So I think that makes it harder to draw too much of a sharp line between the two of them. But I don't think the story is trying to oversell that point. I think it just pointing to the legitimate fact that what's already been published about these characters makes it logical that they would kind of connect in this way. And I it probably has a little bit of the feeling of like, why haven't we published this story before? Or why don't these guys team up more often? Because they have so much that they could talk about in common.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's enough here to where it's not overbearing in the parallels that are drawn between the two of them. Yeah, the origin stories, to an extent, they're very similar. Both seeking wisdom of alternate means that they didn't have before, going to the mystics of the world to try and figure out a problem they have. Doom being his mother, of course, is trapped in a hell dimension, but Strange being, I need my hands fixed because of the accident I was in. But the main difference being one of those learned humility. The other kept up his ego. And then instead of, he goes into this group of magicians and starts a cult, essentially, that starts worshiping him.
Mm-hmm.
These people had been away from the world for, a couple hundred years, and suddenly Victor Von Doom shows up and they're all about him because he's got that charisma, and he abuses that charisma for his own ends. Versus Strange with, meeting the Ancient One and meeting Ancient Genghis as well, and just going and having a bit of hot-headedness and impulsivity and ego to himself, but then learning, no, that's not who I need to be. That's how I got in this scenario in the first place. And he learns humility, which Doom, I think there are aspects of Doom where he has humility about stuff. Like you mentioned earlier, like when he talks to himself, he knows where he won't be able to do things, but he'll never admit that. Doctor Strange, he'll never tell him that, let alone telling like Reed Richards that he ever screwed up. So, yeah, I think the parallels are there for a reason, and to connect these characters who I'm fairly certain have met before in canon before this. This is 89-ish, I think, when this is being written.
Right.
But never really explored the depths of their possible relationship. And I think this was a fun way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we mentioned it a little bit earlier. So how much of this do you think Doom actually planned for, and how much was him just making things up as they went along?
Yeah. I'm inclined, even though I wouldn't say I'm a huge Doctor Doom fan, I do like it better when he is that kind of a master planner. And so I think I'm inclined to give him more credit rather than less. And there is the detail that, he puts Doctor Strange in a position where it seems like Doctor Strange is compromised. But then we also find out that, he gives Doctor Strange a device to get him out of that. Right. So he had that device with him. Right. Is that just which kind of suggests that either he was planning for that specific scenario, or he just plans for a bunch of stuff and just had a bunch of stuff with him so that he could handle a variety of scenarios. And I think that's more the question, right? Is this is he more of the chess player, like thinking so many moves ahead and then anticipating and being prepared for those specific moves? Or is he more of like the Batman of just, I have a plan for everything, right? No matter what you might think of, somewhere in this utility belt, there is a pouch for this exact scenario.
He's got the Mephisto spray repellent.
Yeah,
just ready to go.
Exactly. And I tend to think of Doom as more the first kind of just like he's thought so far ahead that he just needs to deal with the one scenario, and that's often why he why he doesn't succeed in the long run, right? Because he thinks he's so perfectly prepared for one particular scenario, and then there'll be some little wrinkle that somebody will throw in, and that's his undoing. So that's kind of my reading on it. Is maybe not totally planned. I hadn't necessarily thought about the whole thing of he knew. Did he know that somebody was going to be made the Sorcerer Supreme, and that they would have to give a favor, and that he kind of threw the contest so that he would be in that position. Maybe didn't go quite that deep, but I'm inclined to think that he was more prepared than less so. That's my take. What about you?
No, I'm with you there. Doom, for the most part, is one of those people. He doesn't enter a conversation unless he knows the outcome. And there may be people who can rattle him a bit more. If he talks to Reed or something like that, maybe something Reed will say will set him off and set off his plans. Then there's a deviation there. But for Strange, I think for this story specifically, I think he knows enough of him to know that he's willing to go along with this plan and be humble enough to do it, so that he can be just another pawn Doom uses to get exactly what he wants. But he doesn't know everything, so he just adds extra steps along the way. So if this happens, Strange can use that device I gave him. If this happens, then my mother's soul will be released. So I think for the most part, I'm like, maybe 90%, he's got it. The other 10% is a little bit of, the indie ploy, Indiana Jones to be just making up on the fly. and making it look like that's always been your plan. And I think that's one of the genius of Doom is it can be both. Like he could have had everything set out and you'd never know because he's really brilliant. So maybe he had everything planned from the beginning, or he's just adaptable to the situation to where it looks like that was always what he was going to do.
Yeah. Yep, that makes sense.
All right. So we kind of see here humility is a bit of a theme. I don't think it's the major theme, but it's one of the themes in the story. So how does it come into play in the story, and how do our titular characters have to wrestle with it?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this already some, with Doom having to admit to himself where he needs to pick up a few tricks. We touched on, how humility factors into Stephen Strange's backstory, that he had to, he was this pompous surgeon and he had to learn humility as part of his path to becoming a mystic. He also has to be humble enough to say, yeah, I will help out Dr. Doom. And I don't know, I don't know enough to know that that's definitely going to be evil, or, that I'm definitely going to be doing something wrong, that, he might, I'm willing to say that I'm uncertain enough about Doom that he could surprise me and he could be doing something worthwhile. They're also, it also kind of hinges on what you think about, how much Doom anticipated his interactions with Mephisto, right? Did he have to acknowledge some humility there or did he have to acknowledge some failing there, that he couldn't overcome Mephisto with his mystical powers and his technology and the powers of Strange that he had recruited, right? Because you could read the story as, well, he expected to just go in there and blow Mephisto away, and the scheming was something they had to do when he realized that there was just no beating Mephisto on his own turf, and a straight up confrontation of power. And maybe that is what happened, and maybe he had to be more humble than I'm that I was thinking in first reading. But yeah, it's definitely something that both of them have to wrestle with. What else did I miss there?
Well, I think part of his plan, now I may be completely and utterly wrong on this, is that he brings Strange as a potential actual sacrifice if things go bad, and he needs to trade Strange for his mom. And that stopped because of the humbleness of Cynthia Von Doom, which he doesn't plan for. I would say that's part of the plan. He never prepared for that, because I think that would have him know more about his mother than he actually does. And it's her recognizing that Doom is doing these things for her sake, but also really for him, that causes her to let go of even her love for her son, just so she can save them both from going down a path where Doom would be even more monstrous than he already is, and maybe even fall even further into the clutches of Mephisto. So I think Doctor Strange would have made a worthy sacrifice because of his humbleness that he had learned. Now, that obviously we'd be worse off if that had happened in the Marvel Universe. But I think Doom was playing on that, knowing he would never make that sacrifice play, because he could never humble himself to the point of doing that. Maybe my mom deserves to live more than me. Like, no. Or maybe her soul deserves to be freed more than mine does. But Strange, I think, might have done that because of what he's learned.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about her role in the story. Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of, we do have several times here where discussions on the afterlife and souls are brought up. How do we think that they're handled in this story?
I mean, obviously, Mephisto is a possible satanic figure. They kind of hem and haw at different times about how exactly hell works and how and the afterlife works, and how they in the Marvel universe, and how that compares to the Christian concepts in our world and other religious concepts in our world. I think increasingly, I think originally things skewed a little bit more towards, no, this is the literal devil of the literal hell of the Christian religion of the real world. And I think in more modern, more recent stories, they've skewed a little bit more towards, No, it all exists like outside of that, right? Whatever you believe it works in the real world also exists in the Marvel universe, in addition to all of these other story concepts of, Mephisto and Hela and, choose take your pick. So, I probably bring a little bit of that to, I've already kind of compartmentalized all of this in that way. And so I probably bring a little bit more of that to the story than maybe is there, right? I think, there's definitely, a Faustian element to this story. We can talk, that's probably a whole other podcast, is to what extent are, things like Faust and Dante's Inferno and so forth, biblical and, to what extent do they color our concept of the afterlife appropriately or inappropriately with respect to, biblical teaching. But yeah, so in that regard, I think the motif in storytelling, without taking it as too theological, that motif of a devil character that you can make a deal with, but that you can bargain with, and that you have to read the fine print very carefully, it's something that I'm willing to just kind of accept without, saying that it's teaching theology. I think, where I kind of would object a little bit, or where I've always kind of had difficulty is, I'm inclined to more of an embodied soul notion, right? That you can't really have a soul separate from a body of some sort. And so, the comics really love this concept of, the soul is this thing that kind of floats around there separately, and that you can call back to a body, or, move around or trade, you can collect them like trading cards and so forth, and use them as bargaining chips. And that, a character can be alive and conscious and sentient and all of that and sapient and not have a soul, all these different things that they explore in the comics. Then I'm not sure that that's how the real world works. But, again, these are common story tropes. And I could also be wrong about about real world metaphysics as well. So I can't, I can't be too critical. That's definitely a place where my, usual perspective kind of bumps up a little bit against, well, I don't think that's how that would work, but okay.
I get it. Like, I don't get my theology from my comics any more than I get it from, watching Supernatural or something like that. But it's just interesting to see from a worldly perspective, the concept of a soul, like what Stern himself seems to be thinking about stuff like that. I have no clue where he's at, in his religious journey, if he's an atheist, agnostic, whatever. But it's just fascinating to look at this, the idea, because I look at this and I go, that's not how things work. Her soul wouldn't be pure enough on its own just because she was that good of a person. But I look past that for the sake of the story. And the story has a good point to make. And yeah, she loves her son that much that through this sacrifice, which, what mother wouldn't do something like this for her son? Doom is safe from himself, from being caught further into joining up with Mephisto. And of course, you have him too, he's the closest thing Marvel has to the devil. There's an actual devil in Marvel. It depends on who's writing the story. For the most part, because you got your Satanishes, and you've got now with the Hulk comics, you've got the One Below All, and there's a lot you can explore with something like that. So for this story, he's a Satan figure. That's what he's supposed to be. He's that Mephistopheles, where he gets his name from, of just messing with humanity because he's getting something out of it. And what that is further death and destruction and pain. And that sounds like a satanic figure to me. So I can work with that. Now, once again, not big on the whole soul thing, but once again, I know where I'm coming here. I'm not on Sunday morning service getting, having a sermon about the state of the soul. I'm getting a worldly perspective on things that have been brought up in different philosophies and religions. So I'm fine with that. So I think it's ultimately to this story's service that it maintains the personal theology it makes for itself.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think you're right that that the crux of the story is about self-emptying or self-sacrificing love, and that can be redemptive. And whether it's ultimately redemptive or not, right? That's a whole separate theological question. But it's better than the alternatives, right? I think it's good to highlight that as a positive force or a positive move in the world. And I don't think we need to ask more of the story than that, than to be encouraging virtuous acts and discouraging vices.
There you go. All right. Anything else you want to add to this discussion before we start wrapping up?
No, I feel like we've covered a lot of the ground here, and I'm happy with it. If you are.
Yeah, I am as well. If you guys want to check this out, as Andy mentioned earlier, this is on Marvel Unlimited. Worth the price of admission there. I mean, just for the story alone, but plenty more. I'm not a shield for Marvel, but yeah, they do offer a fairly decent service. As well, guys, we're going to have a special bonus question. We're going to ask ourselves, what other magical characters, doesn't have to be just Marvel, would we have liked to see show up in the tournament, just for the sake of fun? All right, rating and reviewing, what do you think out of 10? What are you giving this story?
I think it's probably an 8 or 9 for me. Okay. We didn't talk a lot about the art, but we've got Mike Mignola
artwork
on art, and that's a nice treat in the Marvel world, and nothing bad to say about that. And really really excellent writing from Roger Stern, and some good some core kind of story beats for two classic Marvel characters. So I think it's a really good one.
Yeah, I'm giving this a 9. We got some great character studies, especially of Doom. Like you mentioned earlier, Strange is a little more passive. He goes through an arc. It's just not the greatest compared to Doom, of course. But story's solid. It works on prior continuity. And as a continuity buff, I love when writers do that, building up on what happened before. This is great. You guys should check it out. But other things they should check out. Andy, what are you thinking of recommendations for the audience from another form of literature?
Yeah. So I was trying to think a little bit about, something other than just a print book. Recently, my wife and I listened to the audiobook version of Simu Liu's memoir autobiography called We Were Dreamers. And I thought it was a really good and really encouraging and challenging story. He narrates the audiobook, which gives it a nice touch. So you get to see more of his personality come through in that as well. And you get, he's pretty honest about his upbringing, his history, the challenges that he had, both within his family dynamics and also as a Chinese American Chinese Canadian, trying to make it in Hollywood, both the overcoming the difficulties of being Canadian and also being of Chinese heritage. His parents immigrated to Canada when he was young, so he mostly grew up in Canada, but had a little bit of a childhood in China as well. And you may know him from as Shang-Chi in the Marvel Universe, and so you get some of the back story there as well. But also, a lot of the work, more emphasis on the work that he is doing in the real world to be a voice for other Asian Americans and Asian Canadians. As well. I thought there was more depth to it than I was expecting, but also it was fun and cool to hear more of his personality. So I would recommend the audiobook version, but if you prefer the print version, I think either way you're in good stead.
All right, excellent. I'll be recommending, just as an overview overall, the Dresden Files series by Jim Butcher. It is, TJ and I talked about the religion of it not too long ago. Had a great time with that one. It's a fun blast. I mean, tons of mythologies are mixed in there, and I love world building. I love what it does. So check out the Dresden Files. Guys, thank you very much for all that you do. Please, if you get a chance, leave a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice. Help us with the ratings there to find more people. If you're on YouTube, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below so we can engage with you guys. We'd love to do that. And to find more people, through the algorithm, however the heck that works. If you get a chance, just send an email our way, systematicgeekology@gmail.com. If you have any questions for us, if you have episode ideas you want us to do, we're always willing to engage with our fans that way. I'd like to shout out some patrons real quick. Thank you, Aaron Hardy, Daniel Sigmund, Trip Fuller, and James Barrett. You guys are the best. But remember, we all are chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
Be sure to check out other Anazal Ministry Podcast AMP Network shows. You can see the whole network in a single feed if you're on Spotify, or you could go to Apple Podcasts and find the Anazal Ministries Network podcast, the AMP Network. Yeah, there's just a network on Apple. You can follow the whole thing. You'll get shows like The Homily, where Pastor Will goes through his homily messages. It's literally just Pastor Will's sermons, guys. It's great. You also get access to the Whole Church podcast, where TJ and myself interview leaders from across different denominations and backgrounds to work towards a more full church unity. You can see My Seminary Life, where Brandon Knight discusses his experiences at seminary and then discusses seminary topics, so anyone can have access to knowledge available to seminary students. You also can see Let Nothing Move You over there, where Christian Ashley goes through the Bible in a Bible study type fashion and explains the whole biblical narrative. I also have a show on there, The Dummy for Theology, where we discuss various theological topics in an attempt to show every side of the discussions, leaving you with more questions than answers. There's also The Bible After Hours, where the foul-mouthed preacher goes through the Bible from a more progressive view to challenge the status quo of the modern church. Finally, you can hear The Clydes, where Taylor and Elizabeth Clyde go through weekly discussions in a devotional conversational style method to help us all get closer to one another and to God.
Hi, my name is TJ Blackwell, also known as Tejas, Tiberius Wan, Tejas Jackson, Kung Fu Dugong recently. I go by many names, and I came here today to ask you to please check out our YouTube channel. There are a bunch of exclusive series there, like Comic Book Ketchup, Manga Mustard, Drinks with Tejas, which is my personal favorite, the one where I get to talk to other people about their favorite drinks or just drinks in general. We have a companion series to our annual theme on YouTube. We do Friday Night Frights, Wednesday Night Weeaboo. Those are both ran by Christian Ashley. He's great. Check him out. There are exclusive shorts, which are pretty new. Christian reviews. He's going to review every Spider-Man comic one at a time, which is insane. Non-canon, which is where Joshua will be reviewing one IP from outside of canon in his favorite fandoms, or a piece of literature that is part of the biblical extra canonical material, which is a super interesting short series. Will's Wednesday pull list, where he talks about his comic book pull list each week. He picks a top comic for his weeklies. And there are other surprise bonus content. It goes straight to YouTube. And many of our regular podcast episodes get posted there as well, because we like to see each other when we talk, and we don't want to rob you of that ability. So check us out, like, subscribe. We would appreciate it so much, and it helps us a ton. Thank you.